Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the second session. We'll be exploring some philosophical issues. In fact, we're going to be going into a little bit more detail today on Ibn Taymiyyah and the Hanbalite school and its reaction in particular to some of the arguments for God's existence. Now, why this is important is because obviously when we're using arguments for God's existence, we want to be convinced that it's in line with the Sunni orthodoxy, and as well as being veracious. So I'm going to be doing this with Ibn Taymiyyah, and I'll be choosing an Ash'arite scholar as well, who I think is going to be Al-Ghazali, because it makes sense that it is him that we do the same thing with. In other words, we'll be looking at is subjecting some of the arguments for God's existence to some scrutiny, but the scrutiny is not from the atheistic interrogator. This time it's from the theistic one. And so we're starting with Ibn Taymiyyah, and we're going to be focusing in particular on the issue of taqib. Not least because it actually has become somewhat of a controversial topic. Taqib meaning composition. It has become somewhat of a controversial topic, especially when there is arguments being made and debates being had in Muslim people or theistic people and atheistic people. And it's important for us to have this background so that I don't, for example, or we don't as Muslim people, when someone is put forward for a debate, have all these attacks from our own side, which, can be remedied with some level of knowledge. But also because, to be honest, Ibn Taymiyyah has made some really significant contributions which tether and refine the argument. And he is, as you'll see, scrupulously meticulous in precision and logical thought process. So we're going to be looking at, this might sound a bit overwhelming, but 10 distinct parts, distinct parts of Ibn Taymiyyah's, there's going to be 10 distinct parts of this particular session. The first part is going to be an interleaving section where we're going to be connecting the dots with the previous session that we had, and I'm going to be asking you guys some questions about the Hanbalite development. Particularly when I say Hanbalite, I also mean here the Salaf, if you like, and all these kind of things. So I want to open it to the floor, actually, with the first question. Considering what was discussed last week, in fact, before we start, is Ali Dawa on the phone? Someone call him? Yeah, do you want to? Yeah, it's fine. You can keep that in. It's no problem. Let's call him because I want to see if he can answer this question as well. Considering that which was discussed last week, how would you characterize creedal discussions in the early days? Mahdi, how would you characterize it?
What era?
We're talking about the first 200 years, let's say.
So
200-300 years of Islam.
Not a lot of discussion on the attributes of God and the intricacies of them. It's very just everything's on the prima facie kind of thing.
Okay.
Just affirmation.
So when you say not a lot of discussion, we're talking here about more speculative discussion.
No speculative theology as of yet. Yeah.
So there was, you could say it was characterized by
Even Imam Malik, basically. That's the height, you could say, that I got to.
Yeah, okay. But how would you finish the sentence? The first 200 to 300 years of Islam in creedal discussions was characterized by what? What kind of approach?
Athari.
Okay, well, you can call it an Athari approach. What else would you call it?
Traditionalist.
Okay, great. A scripturalist approach, a traditionalist approach. That's good. This is the correct answer. Yeah. So, in the beginning, there wasn't really this long discussions, about the speculative theology and so on. My question then is, what changed, Abdurrahman? What were some of the turning points that changed this game, this situation?
I wasn't here last week, but just guessing.
Yeah.
It seems to me that after the Mu'tazila came and started to say that the Qur'an was created, people who are averse to speculative theology, like Imam Ahmad himself, wrote books like Ar-Radd al-Jahmiyyah, I think. Yeah. And then he kind of used Ilm al-Kalam, the same Kalam that he was against, to, I think what he said was that it was necessary for us to now defend and speak about that which we were quiet about earlier.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned that quote, and that's a good characterization, because I'll mention exactly what he said. I have the exact quotation in translation. In fact, it can be retrieved from Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal's As-Sunnah by Al-Khalal. Al-Khalal is obviously, as we said last week, is one of his main students. Imam Ahmad is saying, we used to command people to be silent as well as to leave off any indulgence in kalam or issues relating to the Qur'an's nature. But when we were called upon to do so, it became necessary to treat these issues in need of further elaboration. As you correctly said, I mean, if you look at his first treatise, if you like, Usul al-Sunnah of Imam Ahmad, compare it with Ar-Radd al-Jahmiyyah, for example, there's a major development there in terms of the argumentative method. You know, how he's arguing now and talking about tanaqud and contradiction and bringing these other precepts in place. Obviously, we must also warn that there is some level of discussion about the authorship. Is Ar-Radd al-Jahmiyyah attributed to Imam Ahmad, or is it not attributed to him? But that's a separate discussion. What we know is that Ad-Darimi, he was one of his students, and who came after him, he went all out in terms of his response to the Mu'tazila, as you mentioned, after the Greek translation movement, in terms of using argumentatively speculative methods, and so on. But there's maybe some figures before the Mu'tazila, or even the proto-Mu'tazila, who are mentioned in these discussions, who maybe came across, but in the first, second century. Who am I thinking about?
Jahm and Safwan and Ja'd.
Yeah, Ja'd ibn Dirham and Jahm ibn Safwan, who are mentioned obviously Ar-Radd al-Jahmiyyah. This is Imam Ahmad's Ar-Radd al-Jahmiyyah, those who followed Jahm ibn Safwan. But do we have any works of Jahm or Ja'd?
No.
I mean, that's why some maybe more skeptical members of the Western academic tradition will say the man didn't even exist. I mean, we don't have anything written. I mean, do you know, funny enough, you know who mentioned this in brackets in one of his works? Yasir Qadi. He mentioned, Ja'd ibn Dirham. He wrote his PhD on this kind of things. And he said Ja'd ibn Dirham, if the man even existed at all. So anyway, the point is surely, there was a development here. But who else? Who are some figures there we discussed last week? Yes, Ibn Kullab was somebody who came before or after Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari? Before him. And he was seen as some kind of a precursor, was he not, to the Ash'ari movement? Who else was seen as a precursor like that to the Ash'ari movement? Yes. Yes, and do we have any real works of Ibn Kullab? We don't have any works of Ibn Kullab, just like we don't have any works of Ja'd ibn Dirham or Jahm ibn Safwan. And so we are relegated to heresiological texts. And heresiology is basically firaq. This question of when people write about the other, they write about them in, they are the heterodox and they are the orthodox. So obviously this is why it's called heresiology, but we only know about these people from their opponents, basically, if you want to put it in that way. But Muhasibi, on the other hand, actually we do have texts from him. We have manuals and stuff like that, Sufi and all, some his books, and so on. Okay, so then there was the development of the Ash'ari movement, which we'll talk about again maybe, but which happened after that. Now, let's move on to Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, what is interesting about, we spoke about this last week, but let's bring it back to the Furqan. What is interesting about Ibn Taymiyyah? Give me a couple of things that make him an interesting figure.
He was somebody.
Yes. Yeah, somebody who, give me something more substantive than that. Yeah. What is interesting about him? For a Hanbali.
So he did use the kalam.
Yes.
And he gives so going back to the continuous argument, his arguments to explain, for instance, the composition fallacy.
Yeah.
Even though it was back in centuries ago.
And that's something that nobody did before him from the Hanbali school, right?
Yeah.
Even the most liberal members, you don't see that they were doing something like that, right? So.
Yeah, he was more inclined with the use of the kalam.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the correct answer. I mean, that's what really distinguished him from the other Hanabila, the other people from the Hanbali madhab, that he was indulged really in this thing, as we're going to find out. I mean, and this is why it's almost untenable, the position that some people have, some hardcore scripturalists, which we respect their opinion. I mean, if you want to say that, just obviously keep to a scripturalist understanding. We expect the conservatism of those individuals. However, if they want to use Ibn Taymiyyah, it's impossible almost to use him as an evidence for that kind of scripturalism, because as we've seen here, like, you know, the man is going into discussions which really beyond his time, before his time, like, you know, he making statements and about the universals, as we'll come to, the compositional fallacy, as we'll come to, you know, and so on. Okay. Now, what is tarkib? Like, before we talk about the issue of tarkib, because this is something which all the schools of thought had some discussion about, because obviously it's not just applicable to the arguments for God's existence, it's actually applicable to God's attributes as well. So that's why there's a deep intersectionality between those two camps, you know, God's attributes, or the theological camp, and also the, if you like, the philosophical camp. So what is tarkib? How would you understand, what is tarkib exactly? Yes, go ahead, tell us what you...
Well, a direct translation would be composition.
Yes.
So I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? What makes up something in terms of attributes? Yeah, in terms of attributes, what makes up something, whether that's physical or non-physical attributes.
Right. Okay. So what was Ibn Taymiyyah's gripe with uses of tarkib argument by Ibn Sina?
Yeah, he pointed out that Ibn Sina's argument for God's existence denies God's attributes, so thus making like Abrahamic conceptions of God untenable.
Beautiful, excellent. That's really well put. I'm happy with that. That was a correct answer. In fact, let's be more specific here. Since you've given the correct answer, I will give you a little bit more when it comes to this. In fact, before I give you maybe the correct answer, let's talk about what Ibn Sina first said. So let's remind ourselves of Ibn Sina's tarkib. Tarkib, you know, Ibn Sina's Burhan argument, or the contingency argument for God's existence, you know, an important aspect of it, which dealt with the objection of the contingency of the universe, is tarkib. Okay, and obviously it's important because, like, the question is, it's always going to come to you: why is the universe not the necessary existence? This is the question, that why is the universe not the necessary existence? Why is the multiverse not the necessary existence? Because we're saying, okay, there has to be a necessary existence. Yeah. So the question now is, the atheist will say, okay, why is it not the universe itself? Why is it not the multiverse? You've got maybe an infinite multiverse, a limited multiverse. So this is what Ibn Sina is saying. He says that, and this is a translation, it's not my own. The book Remarks and Admonitions, Physics and Metaphysics, an Analysis and Annotated Translation. Every cause of a totality that is something other than its units, first of all, a cause of the units and then the totality. Okay? If this is so, then let the units not be in need of this cause. Then if the totality is completed by its units, it will not need this cause either. Rather, a certain thing may be a cause of some of the units, of the exclusion of some others. Such a thing is not the cause of the totality in an absolute manner. If the essence of that whose existence is necessary is composed of two or more things that unite, it becomes necessary by them. One of these things, or every one of them, will be prior to it and constituent of it. Therefore, that whose existence is necessary is indivisible, whether in concept or in quantity. So this is where, you know, Ibn Taymiyyah will say, wait a minute, in concept, hold on a minute, what do you mean by that? Yeah, or whether in concept or in quantity, everything whose existence is dependent on a sensible body is necessitated by that body and not by its own essence. Every sensible body multiplies into matter and form by quantitative division and by conceptual division. Again, for every sensible body, you will find another body of its species. Species here is like jins in Arabic, or of another species. It's not like animals. It's not like, you know, the giraffe and this and this. Just in case, this is specialized philosophical jargon. Yeah, if considered in relation to its corporeality. Thus, every sensible body and everything dependent on it is caused. Shakir, what is he saying here? Do you need a minute to think about it?
Is he basically saying that?
Because I know it's a bit of a mouthful here.
Yeah.
That's why I said that.
Anything which is composed of parts basically is dependent. And in that paragraph that you read out, he goes on to kind of explain the different ways that is. So
That's a good way of putting it. Yes, obviously he's making a cause-based argument here. The way we've refined it in the Institute here is that we've said that it doesn't have to be a cause-based argument. If we stuck to the strict Avicennian model, it would be a cause-based argument, for sure. But he has made a cause-based argument, and he's clearly made a lot of postulations. Now, let's go straight into Ibn Taymiyyah's problem with it. And you'll find this, Ibn Taymiyyah's issue with it, in As-Safadiyya, page 105 of the, I don't know what edition which they're talking about here, we'll maybe bring it in the subtitles, Beirut edition, yeah? Muhammad Rashad Salim edition, yeah? 1985, page 105. So he's saying on this, he is saying, Ibn Taymiyyah, that there are 5 different ways that taqib can be exhaustively identified. There's 5 different ways you can think of composition. One of those ways is mahiyya, with quiddity, or another one is am and khas, general and specific, jins and nawa. These are all subdivisions, like a category and a subcategory. And I'll make you understand what this is. That and sifat, the essence and the attributes of something. Numerical multiplicity, like kem. And then he says, as for anything possessive of material form, then it is also tarkib. And these are the 4th and 5th types. So we don't need to actually go into detail as to all these things, because it would actually require some level of logical background. In Arabic logic, there are these 5 kulliyat al-khams. They're the 5 universal things. You know, the jins, the nawa', the fasl, and what else? No. The huh?
Fossil genes? No, khas.
No, yeah. Khas.
What's the bait one?
No. We'll get it. I actually forgot it myself, right? That's what I was actually asking. But these like the jins is the category, the kulliyah. The kulliyahs are the universals, yeah? There are 5 universals. If someone can bring it out, it would be good, actually. Actually, I got it here. I got it in my own writing. You've got the jins, the genus, the fasl, the specific difference, the nawa', the species, the arad, the accident, the arad, and the khassa, which is the property. The arad, when they say accident, it's not like an accident like cars smashing on each other. And arad is basically something which is غير قائم بنفسه. That is something which is قائم بنفسه, which I'll tell you what this means.
Is it sensible bodies?
No, let me explain, right? So, an essence is something which is subsistent within itself, where an accident or arad is something which is not. Like, for example, a color, like red, the red color, this red color, yeah? Redness is not something which exists in of itself. It has to have some object which it inheres in order to instantiate. Huh?
That's a locus.
Yeah, you can say so, but they don't translate it like this. They translate it as accident. For some reason, almost everyone has agreed to this translation in the philosophy of religion. They translate it as accident. Now, why have they translated it as that? I don't know, yeah? But that is what arad is, okay? So, that is something which is obviously the opposite of arad, in the sense that that, an essence, is something which exists in and of itself. It does not require something else to inhere within it in order to exist, yeah? So, basically, if and this is based on Aristotelian logic, yeah. This is based on this characterization. The 5 thing is based on the organon and all these kind of things. It's based on Aristotelian logic, but the Arabs took it on board and they basically made something of it. And almost every logical textbook, Sulum and Munawwaraq and all that, you'll find these 5 there. It's like, it's very important thing. Yeah. Now, in terms of, for example, just to break things down for you, yeah? And this was in the Aristotelian or the Hellenistic period, but also it's in the Arab logic or whatever, Islamicate logic. I shouldn't say call it. Why am I calling it Arab? But it's written in Arabic and sometimes Persian as well. These 2 languages, the written languages, right? So in the Islamicate period, where it's mostly written in Arabic and Persian, it would be, for example, that they would use the example of the speaking animal, or the rational animal, al-haywan al-natiq. Human being is haywan, is an animal. Yes. but it's also a rational act. What differentiates the human from all the other species, in this sense I mean actual animals, yani, all the other animals, is his rationality, the ability to introspect, ask why, moralize and all these kind of things. That's what differentiates a human being from everything else, yeah? All the other animals. So the category is, the main category is haywan, which is that who we are in a category of haywan. And the subcategory is natiq, which is that he is the rational one. So this is actually a construct. He's saying this is a construct. Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, well, not Ibn Taymiyyah, the logicians would say, this is a construct. We are a construct of two things fundamentally. Human beings are two things fundamentally. They're human, they are an animal, yes, and they are rational. And so this is a kind of tarkib. Do you understand? This is a kind of composition. Do you get it? Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, yeah, this is a composition, it's true, but it has no bearing on real life. It's only something which is composed in your mind. It's like if I say, think of a golden mountain. Yani, if you're thinking of a golden mountain right now, which is probably something which cannot escape your mind, right? If I say, don't think of something, yeah, and you'll think about it even more. Don't think of a pink elephant. All you guys are thinking about pink elephant. That's all you're thinking about. But it doesn't exist in the real world. I mean, unless someone has put pink paint on an elephant, or it has some kind of disease on its skin. But I've never seen a pink elephant. Just because you can think about it, it doesn't mean it exists. That's what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying. He's saying this tarkib, although mentally legitimate, okay, we're not saying it doesn't exist in your mind. He's saying there's not actually such a thing as that, in the real world. So when you're saying that human being is a rational animal, you're constructing these two things together in your own mind, but it's not something which has any bearing on any real world situation. Do you see this? And he goes in likewise format with all of these different things. So like, for example, that was al-am wal-khas, or jins and nawa, right? But then he can say the same thing applies with that and sifat. What is the actual, because one of the criticisms of the Falasifa is that, and the Mu'tazila actually as well, is that you cannot have ta'addud al-dhawat. You cannot have many essences. So they ask the question, God is made up of so many attributes, right? He is Ar-Rahman, He is Ar-Rahim, He is Al-Qawi, He is Al-Alim. He is all of these things. He is the most powerful one, He is the most merciful one, and all these things. But they say this is a kind of disguised polytheism. I mean, that's how far they're going. I mean, this is Mu'tazila saying, this is what you talk about, many gods, a pantheon of gods in one, actually. That's what you're talking about. But Ibn Taymiyyah is saying the only reason why you've come to that conclusion, yes, is because you've given each of those attributes an essence. You see, he's saying that really these attributes they're not, all of these, it's not pantheon of different essences with their own will and the center of consciousness coming together. He's saying therefore you're confusing the categories here. The reason why you've decided to negate the attributes of God is because you have misconceptualized in the first instance what this idea of tarkib is. So he was very staunch against this point. He said that you can't have this kind of tarkib. You've already misconceived. You'd have to first anthropomorphize the attributes of God in order to thereafter negate them like that. And this is a very legitimate concern. I mean, this is a problem. If one is saying that the equivalent of things which are made up of pieces and stuff, or which he's going to tell us what the right way is, yeah, but or something which is material and susceptible to dissembly, yeah, the equivalent of that is like the conceptual adding together of different concepts. If he's saying if you're putting these two things on the same level, ontological status, then here you have an issue. So he doesn't throw the baby with the bathwater out, which is why he says the following. He says this is the only legitimate type of tarkib, composition. He says, and the phrase murakkab, composition, is meant to signify that which something else has put together, namely the being whose parts were separated and then put together, or that which is susceptible to disassembly. Yeah, this is what he's saying, and he mentions this in Sharh Aqid al-Isfahaniyya, page 116. Yeah, and then he goes on to further say, it could be said that the intended meaning of the phrase tarkib is that there are two parts which are separated and then some composing agent appears to have put them together, which explains why the term murakkab is passive participle, يعني اسم مفعول. This is just as food is made up of various shares and portions. Garments consist segments of cloth. Medicines attain their function from the various ingredients and the like. And this is also mentioned in Sharh al-Isfahaniyya, page 121. So he's saying that basically for him, therefore, the kind of tarkib which is acceptable is only one kind. And that is something which is susceptible to disassembly. That you can remove from it is susceptible to addition or subtraction on an empirical level. If something you can take away from it and put into it on an empirical level, this is something which is murakkab, is composed. Yeah. So if someone there is, he's not saying this himself. He's not making the argument. But if I were to make the argument there, which we do make, anything made up of composed parts, and by that we mean something which is susceptible to disassembly. If something is made up of that, therefore that thing is contingent. The universe is made up of pieces or composed parts. Therefore, it's contingent. Yani. This wouldn't go against Ibn Taymiyyah. Do you see the point here? Because Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, actually, the only problem I have is the problem with a composition of different attributes, and if you're using the conceptual, the am, the khas, not this definition. In fact, he's the one who offers this definition. So a lot of what we're seeing today is a lot of people come and say, well, you shouldn't use this argument because it will lead to negating the attributes. We say it only can lead to negating the attributes if what?
You go for the first definition.
If we go for any of the other definitions, other than Ibn Taymiyyah's definition, which is what?
That taqib is something that is subject to disassembly.
Yeah,
you take out of it.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, that's it. So after you've identified it, yeah, then that's it. It's done. Then the atheist interlocutor now has to come and say why the universe, despite being susceptible to injection, or let's just call it additional subtraction, yeah, despite having this thing, but being made composed of different parts which are susceptible to such thing, why is it that it can still be seen as necessary? Do you see the point? Yeah. Okay. Any questions so far? Because I know we're kind of moving quickly.
You said that this is anything which is susceptible to decomposition on an empirical level, right?
Yeah.
So if an atheist is to say, well, take the universe for instance, we don't have any empirical evidence that you can subtract from the universe or take something out of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to show that. Ibn Taymiyyah is saying that if it's conceivable, and he does say if it's conceivable, he said even if you don't see it, he may mention that in Manhaj al-Sunnah, yeah? He says even if it's conceivable that this thing, which is an object, you can take something out of it and put into it, even if you haven't witnessed such a thing, then the thing is composed. But that's what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying. I'm saying that Ibn Sina, or the original argument, says anything that is made up of parts. We've refined what we mean by parts now. Yeah, anything which is made out of parts is contingent. The universe is made out of parts. We don't need to prove that the universe you can take things out and put things in. All we need to show is that the universe is made out of parts, which is indubitable. No one can. It's incontrovertible. No one can say, well, the universe is not made out of parts. If you say, well, the multiverse is not made out of parts, well, what differentiate? How could it be a multiverse? You're using the word multi anyway. How could it be a multiverse if it's not more than one universe? So each universe is a part of the multiverse, and it's not just any part. It's a part that could otherwise not be in there, even if we didn't witness that. So to Ibn Taymiyyah, this would not be an issue. Yes.
Oh, was one of the main reasons why Ibn Sina was making this argument is because he believed in universals. Because if he didn't, would he have thought something like that?
The thing is, to be honest, we'll actually come to the idea of Ibn Taymiyyah's, and I do believe it's problematic. And I have to be honest with you, like, you don't have to agree or disagree with me here, but his objections on this whole universals thing, yani, we have to ask ourselves, to what extent can he remain consistent with this? This is the question. To what extent can Ibn Taymiyyah remain consistent with this? We'll see what I mean by that. But this idea of denying of the universals is not something you find from the Salaf. I mean, you will not find Al-Lalaka'i and Ibn Battah in his kitab saying, and we deny the universals. Like, you will not find this. Or at Tahawi's Creed saying, yes, and we deny the kulliyat. It's impossible to find such a thing. It's not there. It just doesn't exist. And so we have, like I said before, if someone takes a different opinion to Ibn Taymiyyah on his theo-philosophical renderings, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that you disagree with him philosophically on an issue which the Nas has not actually spoken about explicitly. And that is the reality of the situation. And that's why I was saying last week that Ibn Taymiyyah does not represent, all of his positions are not an imitation of what the Salaf said. He has expanded. I'm not saying he's going against them, but he says things that they never said. That is a fact. And no one can deny that fact. Only somebody who is maybe a liar or or something like this, yeah? Okay. So we covered the following. We talked about the Hanbali development, okay, of the creed and stuff like that, what kind of developments there were. And then we talked about Ibn Taymiyyah and his importance. And we talked about the issue of taqib. And we talked about Ibn Taymiyyah's prime objection, which is one to do with the attributes of God. And now we will talk about Ibn Taymiyyah, and we talked about Ibn Taymiyyah's solution. And then there was this discussions about his general epistemology. So let me read something, okay, to explain to you his general epistemology, okay, from his works, which I've translated myself. And this is in Sharh Aqid al-Isfahaniyya once again, yeah? And you'll find that a lot of these things are intimated in Sharh Aqid al-Isfahaniyya. And it's a very short book, which we're translating, by the way. The Sapience Institute is translating that book and another book of Ibn Taymiyyah, because, as we said, it's quite important, yeah? He says, and it is known that the composed thing in this regard, and by this regard he means something being susceptible to disassembly, yeah, is dependent on something other than itself. That is, if its essence entails composition such that separation would not be possible for it, and the necessary existence cannot be dependent on anything external to itself, as would be contradiction, and that would be contradictory. There is no doubt that those who affirm the attributes of God or any other Muslim group reject this type of composition in relation to God. Ibn Taymiyyah is saying this kind of composition in relation to God, every Muslim group reject it. This is Ibn Taymiyyah saying this, just in case, because some say, well, you are going... This is telling, actually, because Ibn Taymiyyah is actually referencing other groups, even though he's polemical towards them. But he's showing, look, all of us agree here. The Ash'aris agree, the Maturidis agree, everyone agrees, we all agree that this kind of composition is not allowed. Despite this fact, the pseudo-philosophers, and by that he means the actual philosophers, but he's humiliating them, and sometimes he does. And he doesn't give them credit. I mean, it's not that he doesn't give them credit. He does accept, that they are right on some issues, but he never praises them. I don't think I've ever seen anything praising Ibn Sina or those guys. He praises Ghazali all the time. And like we said last week, he will say about him, Hujjat al-Islam, or he will refer to as Sheikh al-Fadil and all these kinds of terms. He'll praise his, but he has his limits. Ibn Taymiyyah has his limits, yeah? They refer to the attributes of God as a kind of composition whereby they claim that the human is composed of genus and a specific difference. And we talked about that. The rational human, they're saying, look at this, the construction, rational human. This is what he's talking about here. He says, through the use of terms like animality and capacity to reason, they assign the meanings of atoms and accidents to the human constitution. If they deduce from this definition that the human being is composed of atoms, then there is nothing in the description of rational animal which warrants this meaning or indicates the accidentality of these values. The meaning embedded in the definition of rational animal are confined to the mental process. Once again, it's a conceptualist critique, yeah? Such that one imagines rationalization in a pure form and then animal in a pure form. And obviously puts them together, right? However, the mere fact that this can be done in the mind does not mean that the external realm, that these three types of substance exist, can be found. And knowledge of this is foundational. And this is basically an anti-idealist stance, clearly, he's almost what you would see from a materialist to an idealist in substance theory. So here he's saying, look, his general epistemology, he's saying if something cannot, and he says this explicitly, and I should bring this up, he mentions if something is not susceptible to arad or jawhar, And he mentions that again in the Sharh Aqid al-Isfahaniyya. If something is not, cannot, arad now we've said, is something which is accident, like a color. And jawhar is something which is indivisible. A jawhar al-fard is an invisible atom, indivisible atom. So jawhar is something which something inheres in. So something which is like the broken down, it's a physical thing. So Ibn Taymiyyah is saying if something is not an accident such that it inheres in atoms, or the simples, call them simples, call them whatever you like, yeah? Things that are broken down into little pieces. A jawhar al-fard, remember, is the indivisible atom. So if something does not break down into these two different types, then it doesn't really exist. Well, the question is, can we subject Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to such a test? This will be the response. You're saying that if something is, there's a jawhar arad test. Is it jawhar? No. He's asking the question with Taymiyyah in Sharh Aqid al-Isfahaniyya. Is this thing that you're talking about, is it jawhar? I say, no, it's not jawhar. Is it arad? Is it an accident? No, it's not an accident. So what is it then? So we say, okay, khalas, no problem. We agree. But the question is, can you subject Allah and His attributes to this test? How do you think he responds? I'll tell you how he responds, because I was trying to find the response. And I looked, left and right and asked some people of knowledge and this and that. And I found the response. And this actually in Ar-Radd ala Mantiqiyin, he mentions this. And the Wa'il Halak actually translates this book. It's called the Response to the Greek Logicians. And by the way, the word Greek is not there in the original title. Maybe that's how some of these brothers from the Salafists, they think that everything is, all the logic is Greek. No, it's not. Some logic is not Greek. Some is Greek, some is not. Anyway, it's a separate topic. He states, Ibn Taymiyyah has this conception of al-hiss al-batini. Al-hiss al-batini, okay? So, Wa'il Halak, you'll be surprised because, he's written political issues and stuff like that, the impossible state and all that kind of. He's Christian, he's not Muslim, by the way, yeah? But he, I don't even know if he's Christian, but he's definitely not Muslim, yeah? Wa'il Halak, he considers Ibn Taymiyyah, he refers to him as an empiricist. And I think this is too strong. Because how can you be a Muslim empiricist? Like, what do you mean by empiricist? Really, the most you can say is that he is anti-idealist. But he's not an empiricist in that sense. But Wa'il Halak mentions, I can even read what he says because I think it's somewhat important. Yeah? He says, Ibn Taymiyyah held that universals can never exist in the extramental world, but only in the mind. In the extramental world, only individuated particulars exist, particulars that are specific, distinct, and unique. In fact, external individuals are so unique, Ibn Taymiyyah argues, that they cannot allow for formation of external universal, I think I've read that wrong, which are subsumed. But these individuals, there can be only an aspect or aspects of similarity, but they cannot be entirely identical. From this, Ibn Taymiyyah concludes that the universality of the genus and species and difference cannot be the essence. He's saying that an essence has to be, because that has to be qa'imun bi nafsi. It has to subsist in and of itself. But he's saying if it's in the mind, then it's not qa'imun bi nafsi. It's in the mind, it's in the dhihn. So for the universal, nothing is more than a common general meaning, and that the mind retains to signify individuals in the real world. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah is saying there are some things that are just in hiss al-batini. Like, for example, your emotions, anger, your love, pleasure, pain, all of that stuff, it's first-person subjective experience, yeah? And he's saying, yeah, we accept that. And then he will relegate the fitrah to this. So the way to because he said the Arad Jawhar test, yeah? You've got the Arad Jawhar test. It is this thing, whatever it is, this universal that you're speaking about. Is it a Arad? Is it an accident? No, it's not an accident. Is it a Jawhar? Is it made up of atoms or something? Yes? Or let's call it a substrate or substance. Let's just call it substance. Jawhar, is it a substance? No. Is it an accident? No. So it doesn't exist. Okay. What would make you say of anger, jealousy, whatever, all these emotions? He said that's in the hiss and batini. So he's got something in his epistemology for that, which is the internal emotions. And the fitrah is there. And therefore, knowledge of Allah can be detected from the fitrah, and that's how you understand Allah. But then the question will be then, well, just as much as you can feel the jealousy and the anger and all these kind of things, these are universal categories in a sense. Can you not? Is it incredulous for someone to say that? Well, you can feel universals. How can you deny that? Well, you can deny that in as much the same way as someone can deny your fitrah, from a demonstrative perspective. Like if we're talking third-person demonstration, and that's what al-Halaqah attacks him on. Actually, he makes a whole thing to tackling on this. If you're saying, well, my fitrah is I believe in God, I feel it of God. Well, someone could say I believe in whatever. Put in the blanks, universal, and then that's it. So it seems to me that there is an issue here, which if there is a price to pay, there is an epistemological price to pay for taking the conceptualist position. Yeah.
What are the creedal implications of accepting universals? Like, why was he running away from that?
I can't speculate, but if I had to have a guess, I think he's just trying to like this might sound quite crass, yeah. But if you're asking me, it's an opinion, a pure opinion, no problem, yeah. I personally believe Ibn Taymiyyah was trying to cut all the routes to a negative outcome. Like, for example, you know his whole thing where he believes there's no metaphor in the Quran, but basically even Hanabila don't accept that, yeah, except for his disciple Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah and so on. But it's not a really popular opinion among the grammarians, for example. Like, there's no. Why do you think he's doing that? I think the reason why he's doing that, so that people say, well, if there's no metaphor in the Quran, well, how can you metaphorize the names and attributes of God if there's no metaphor in the Quran? Do you see? In a likewise format, this is, I think, it's just a trend of how he deals with things. He rips things from the roots. He uproots things. He doesn't like just demolishing something. If he doesn't like cutting down trees, he likes going in and taking the root out and, destroying everything. And so, in this sense, I think he's done the same thing. I think he's said, these people are basically, this philosopher, these Mu'tazila, are using taqib, and they are using takhsis, specification or particularization. They're using these things so that they can come to a conclusion of nafy sifat from a logical perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to annihilate any conception of taqib, just like I annihilated the metaphorization of the Quran in exegetical perspective. It's the same kind of general thought process. You can kind of see the temperament of Ibn Taymiyyah here. You can see what kind of a man he is, quite frankly. He's a bit, it's like a lion, He doesn't like to just take the prey and destroy it. He likes to make sure that, or maybe I shouldn't go into further details, but he makes sure that everything is eliminated, Yeah, but I think that's the reason why. If you ask me, that's my opinion of why he's done that. But why do you need to really take an anti-Neoplatonic position like that much? Is it because the Quran Sunnah makes it so clear? Is it? No, I don't think so. It's simply because, like I say, he wants to really take the sword to the jugular of the opponent, and I think that's what he's done. But as we'll see, there are complications with this, and I'll tell you where the complications are. And I'll be as charitable as possible to him, but he's a thinker just like any thinker, and as Imam Malik says, كل إنسان يؤخذ منه ويرد عليه إلا صاحب هذا القبر. Like, Imam Malik said, every human being on the face of the earth, you take something from him and you reject something from him, except for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I know this figure, which is Ibn Taymiyyah, who we respect very dearly and spending time and effort and to understand what he's saying, is like holy figure. That's what he is. Salafi circles, he's the untouchable one. Really, he's untouchable. Everybody from the Salafis accepts this man. I don't know of any Salafi that does not. Which is major, and he's respected even among other groups, which is why we're talking about him here. But we have to also see where he could have gone wrong. I know that's very uncomfortable for some people. When people refute, is it trying? No, I'm not. It's just what we have to. So we're gonna look at that. Yeah.
When we went through the different ways that he goes through, he's mentioned 5 ways that you can understand composition, and then he basically deletes a lot of the other definitions and says, okay, this is the one that we're talking about, disassembly, whatever. What I understood from you is that he gets rid of the other ones largely based on his epistemological positions,
yes.
like the fact that he denies the universals and stuff like that.
He denies them in the extramental world.
Right. So if we decide to say, okay, we're gonna take what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying in relation, like we're gonna take his definition of parts, but we don't take, for instance, his epistemology.
Yeah.
Then doesn't that make our rejection of the other definitions a bit arbitrary now?
We don't have to say it in that way. Is that we're going to do this and it's like it's a big buffet and we're taking some of this and we're taking some of that. What we're saying, it's not like we have to affirm anything either. I'm not saying go ahead, let's affirm the universals. Ibn Taymiyyah is making a stronger case than just being agnostic about the universals or having a neutral position. Like he is saying that they don't exist in the world. They don't exist in experimental reality. Yeah. And what I'm saying is that going that far and saying something does not exist, like if putting in an atheistic position, like atheists have negative atheists and positive atheists. Positive atheists say God doesn't exist. That most atheists are negative atheists, so they'll say that we don't know if God exists or not. I'm saying there's no need to take a very strong position on universals. I'm not saying that he's wrong about it. Universals might very well might not exist, but it's not. For me, I don't see why it's impossible that Allah might create them. For me, it's not an impossible creation. It's not like a squared circle that Allah creates some universal somewhere. And just to explain, like this idea of Alam al-Ashhad and the Neoplatonic forms and stuff like that. I'm not saying we should adopt the Neoplatonic forms either. That there's this perfect idea of what a sword looks like and the differentiation. What differentiates a knife from a sword? So what length does it actually have to be? So if you get a knife, what length does it actually have to be when it stops being a knife and starts being a sword? When is it? Is it 10 inches, 15 inches, 13 inches? When exactly? So Plato would maybe argue that there's a perfect length where if it gets that length, now it's a sword, because this archetype or this is of the sword is there in the Alam al-Ashhad somewhere. I'm saying that it's not completely irrational, but let me tell you where it gets problematic. So obviously, we went through something in this in these sessions where we were speaking about, and we're moving on now to Tawheed arguments. So in the Go rap, we'll do the Go rap, maybe in more detail. But the idea that Ibn Sina, who remembers how Ibn Sina argues for the oneness of God? Ma'at, do you remember that? Oh, I see, you don't pay attention. How does Ibn Sina argue for the oneness of God? Do you remember?
Yeah. So his argument was a necessary existence can only be one because if there was more than one necessary existence, by definition they would be dependent on the other existence. So so that would make it a contingent existence, not a necessary existence.
Yes. So Ibn Taymiyyah's argument against that is because I looked at Sharh al-Isfahaniyya, and then I couldn't really find, like he attacked it, but he didn't go into detail about this attack. And I kept looking over what he was trying to say, and I couldn't really understood what he was saying, but it wasn't fleshed out nicely. But then when we found that book recently, Tawheed al-Falasifa, which is a new manuscript and whatever, when we found that, and I saw his response there, I think I understood what he was saying now, because it made me understand it. So basically, this is what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying. He's saying, he goes back to the universal thing. He's saying, look, when you're saying there's one necessary existence, another necessary existence, and either, if you're talking about the same thing, it's either tautological, or that one of them is contingent, or that both of them are contingent, or that is created, or that a third party created the two things, which means that that's necessary and both of those are contingent. These are the exhaustive things that Ibn Sina mentions in his book. Yeah, he's saying that, but this is all conceptual analysis. This is all conceptual analysis. It's all concepts. You're just dealing with concepts, and so the necessary existence that you're talking about here is propositional, and this is exactly what Immanuel Kant said. Immanuel Kant, he famously said, existence is not a proposition. I believe Immanuel Kant saw his works, this guy, Ibn Taymiyyah's works, I believe so. Because a critique of pure reason, think of the titles as well. Critique of pure reason and Ar-Radd al-Mantiqiyin, a response to the logicians. Do you see? And Immanuel Kant started his book, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Some manuscripts, yeah. I mean, I do. Immanuel Kant is the biggest, is by far this one of the, in German philosophy is number one basically, in terms of philosophy. But it's exactly what he said here. And I don't want to go into a tangent, but Ibn Taymiyyah has an attack on the syllogism. Have you come across this? In Ar-Radd ala Mantiqiyin, the response to the Greek logicians. Ibn Taymiyyah attacks a syllogism as all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Yeah, that's syllogism. Ibn Taymiyyah said, well, to be honest with you, all you're doing is all the information that is mentioned in the first premise is mentioned the conclusion includes information that is mentioned in the first premise. So in other words, all syllogism are tautological. And by the way, mathematics is tautological as well. And he's right. I mean, if I say 2 + 2 = 4, what am I saying? 4 = 4. Yani 2 + 2 is just another expression of 4. But I'm just saying 2 + 2. But 2 + 2 is just another way of saying 4. So it's like saying 4, expressing it in a different way. All of mathematics is like that. In many ways, the syllogism is like that as well. Because if you say all men are mortal, that includes, obviously, if all men are mortal, then Socrates is mortal. But all you're doing is you're extracting obvious common sense notion from the conclusion from the premise. So he's saying it doesn't give you new knowledge here. That's what he was saying. And it's a very powerful. People think, oh, therefore, because he wrote a book called Ar-Radd ala Mantiqiyin, the response to the Greek logicians, that he's against logic. Yeah, it's just foolish people. He's going deeper than. He's saying logic has its problems. For example, one of his attacks was on al-hadd, or the definition, the logical definition, because he says that kana had be jama' mana', and he says it's not possible. And in fact, he mentions that jama' mana' is comprehensive. Can you have a definition which completely covers all of the things of that particular subject matter? And he says no, it doesn't exist, and you don't need it, and it's a superfluous part of the discourse. For example, what is the definition of love? He mentions love. It is very powerful. What is the definition of love? I mean, that's my question to you. Can you tell me? I mean, there's a song that was, I want to know what love is. I want you to show me. And that's what Ibn Tamiya was saying, is saying that you cannot put love into a definitional format. I want to know what love is. You don't write it down like, I have my own definition of love, by the way. Which is that it's attachment that if threatened causes anxiety and if removed causes grief. But then my problem is that I was thinking about this. How do I differentiate? I'll give you this as an example, right? It's a bit slightly relevant, But how that definition, sorry to say, does not differentiate between platonic forms of love. I'm critiquing my own definition here, but it doesn't differentiate between platonic forms of love and romantic forms of love. Like, how would you give me a definition that you can use in articulated format, which differentiates clearly between romantic forms of love and platonic forms of love? I don't think you can do it. All I come to myself when I thought about it is that, well, it just tastes different, or it feels different, whatever you like. So it's sexual. No, but sex is a different category now.
It's partner of the desire, maybe you can say.
Now let's imagine that there's a romantic relationship between people that have no sexual vigor, but it's still a romantic relationship, like elderly people or something like that. It's still a romantic relationship, How do we differentiate such a relationship between the platonic in terms of definitional format? He's saying, Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, you won't be able to, basically. This is what he's saying. He's literally used this example again, love and all that. He cannot use. He's saying you cannot. Try your best and do this and do that. You can, basically, he says that the ones who know about these things are the practitioners of it. Lovers like me, romantics, true. But that's the point, you see. But anyway, the reason why I'm putting this to your attention is because he was meticulous in his argumentative method. He wasn't slapdash or going in haphazardly and stuff like that. No. He was. He thought very deeply about these matters, as you can see. I mean, really and truly, one of the greatest contributions to the Western philosophical canon made similar arguments, as we're seeing here, which is Immanuel Kant. If you look at Immanuel Kant's attack on the cosmological argument and his attack on the ontological argument, his attack on the ontological argument is very similar to the attack of Ibn Taymiyyah on the universals. And they're not elaborative at all, like Immanuel Kant's. They're not elaborative, but they're just there. Which shows you that great minds think alike, or that maybe great minds copy other great minds. One or the other. But so he's rejecting this. He's saying that this idea of if you talk about necessary existence in this conceptual format, there's an issue here. But the way he's what he does is what he believes in is this thing called tamanu', okay, which is in the Quran. مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِذًا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. That Allah has not taken a son, and nor does He have any creator with Him. And had He had any creators with Him, they would have each snatched away some part of their creation. And so he says this. Ibn Tamiya says, if the world has two manufacturers, it would be the case that if one of them willed something and the other willed the opposite, for example, if one of them willed for the sun to rise from the east and the other one willed for the sun to rise from the west, it would have been impossible for either of the two manufacturers to realize his respective will, as would entail bringing together two opposite things. Yeah? Either one of them will realize his will, such that the other cannot be considered supreme lord, or the opposite. And this is a very strong and probably the most powerful argument. Yeah, you can't have two supreme wills. As simple as that, yani. And when I try and explain this to children, I use maybe I shouldn't, but I use this kind of example, UFC example. Like, imagine if there's if God, sorry to say, it cannot be imagined that He will lose a fight. Or it cannot be imagined He'll draw a fight. Cannot fight, draw. And if He had to compromise, then that would entail His insufficiency. And so this is basically the argument. So he's saying this is fine. But then the question is, doesn't this argument itself become conceptual? If you're talking about supreme will, it's not something you've seen, is it? Have you seen this? I mean, have you seen the supreme will of God? You've not seen that. The supreme creative capacity of God, you've not seen that. The only thing I can say now, in order to save Ibn Taymiyyah from this trouble, is as follows, and I have thought about this quite a lot, yeah, is to say that Ibn Taymiyyah, and he makes this clear in Sharh al-Isfahaniyya, he says that we must have cosmological, not we must have, but he prefers cosmological starting points to the arguments for the existence of God, and then argues on infinite regress basis, which is against what Wa'il al-Hallaq said, because Wa'il al-Hallaq said that he doesn't even make an argument of God's existence, which is false. He does make an argument of God's existence. Clearly he does. Ibn Taymiyyah makes an argument for God's existence in Sharh al-Isfahaniyya. He says the best arguments from Huduth. And he does the same thing in Mas'alat Huduth al-Alam. And he rejects the Huduth al-Ajsam argument of the Mu'tazila, and that also the Ash'aris use, which is atomism, the idea of atomism and so on. And he doesn't reject the Imkan argument of Ibn Sina. He accepts it, but he says it's just long and unnecessary. That's what he's saying. He said it's correct, but it's not. It's long. It's a bit long. And he had all this problem with taqib. But he actually rejects the Jawhar argument, the Huduth al-Ajsam argument of the Mu'tazila. He actually rejects it, and this is mentioned clearly in his books. But what I was saying about that is that the only thing I can say is that whereas with Ibn Sina's argument, he is starting directly with the conceptual analysis. He's saying, look, imagine if you have one necessary existence, and he says necessary existence is something that cannot be imagined any other way. A contingent thing is that if it's removed, no contradiction would occur. So if something which is necessary, which cannot be exist in any other way, if it's removed, then an impossibility will occur from in the creation. And so he's saying, forget about all of that. Ibn Taymiyyah says, start with cosmological starting points. We see the rain coming down from the sky. We see the plants coming out from the ground. We see the trees coming, all this kind of things. All of this has a beginning, right? Yeah, we say it has a beginning, no problem. He said that it can have an infinite regress, and you know the argument. And he argues that there cannot be an infinite regress of causes, but he does believe in hawadith la awwala laha, clearly, yeah, which is that God is perpetually creating into the past, and he believes in actual infinity, therefore. That yastalzim, that entails that he believes in actual. So which goes against the Ash'ari proof, which we'll talk about next week. The view that there cannot be an actual infinity. It cannot exist mathematically. And there's a controversy in maths, not just in philosophy, in maths, whether or not an actual infinity can happen or not.
Even in the future?
No, in any form. There's a controversy as if this thing exist or not. And you might have Hilbert's famous hotel. Have you heard of this? Yeah. William Lane Craig and all these kind of things talk about it. Yeah. And if you look at William Lane Craig's kind of argumentative method, he's using Ash'ari arguments, okay? But it's not just Ash'ari arguments, it's obviously arguments of John and Philoponus and these other individuals before, but really he uses the Ghazalian version, yeah? Which is an Ash'ari version. So it's interesting that, he's using the Qur'an to defend the Bible, or he's using the Muslims to defend his faith. that's something else for another day. But that's the idea of infinity. One of the proofs for the existence of God that are used by the Ash'aris, especially Ghazali, is that there cannot be an infinity in the real world, and then he says, therefore, there must be first cause, whatever. You've heard this argument before. I'm sure you've heard it before, yeah? Cosmological argument, the first way of Thomas Aquinas or whatever, yeah? Ibn Tamiya says, I don't care about all of that, and there can be an infinity in the real world, which is very powerful. He says, I don't care about all that. And in fact, he refutes Al-Razi in Dar' al-Tarab al-Aql wal-Naql, who came before him and didn't have a chance to respond, therefore. But he refutes him. No, he refutes him and says, why cannot? He says, do you not believe? In fact, he makes an interesting point. He said, do you not believe in heaven, hell? And it's going to be infinite time and infinite this and infinite that coming. So why do you make an exception for post-eternity? And he makes logical points, Yani. And if you speak to an atheist who is, hell-bent on the opinion that infinity can exist in the real world and there can be an infinite multiverse, then you insisting that they can't be the case, you're going to have to bring out all of the tools of the mathematical warehouse, and you're going to have to show them this and that. Ibn Taymiyyah's way actually helps us here, because he's saying, look, even though there can be an infinite regress of things, originated things, that God perpetually creates into the past, there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. And he gives exactly pretty much the same proof as the philosopher. And he says, I don't know of anyone who disagrees with that. And he's right, there's not many people who disagree with the point that there cannot be an infinite regress of causes or originated things. Unless I've missed something on the quantum discussions, certainly not in the medieval world, that was the case. Any questions here?
I was going to say in relation to the supreme will, can Ibn Taymiyyah say that it's not? It's in the Quran.
Again, in relation to
the supreme will.
Yeah.
He says, look, it's in the Quran that Allah has that, and for X, Y, Z reason, I believe in the Quran as being legitimate.
No, he doesn't say this. In fact, quite frankly, Ibn Taymiyyah refutes Al-Amadi. That's exactly what Al-Amadi says. Al-Amadi, the Ash'ari Al-Amadi, he says that the Tamana argument, he doesn't accept it. He says, I accept it only because khabar. It's in the Quran. I accept it because Allah has revealed it. Ibn Taymiyyah says, no, actually, and he refutes him on that. Ibn Taymiyyah refutes him on the grounds that actually, no, this is not, you cannot just say it's in the Quran and that's like that. He says, and this whole idea of Dar' al-Ta'arib al-Aql wal-Naql comes out here. But Ahmadi has the jur'ah, actually, the boldness, to say, even though it's in the Quran, as an argument, can you imagine this? He says, even though I don't accept the argumentative structure of this. Al-Ahmadi is saying that, he's saying that I believe in the verse as khabar, but I wouldn't use it as an argument.
Why? Because it's circular, does it become circular? Or because the argument's not good?
From what I remember, what Al-Ahmadi is saying is that basically you cannot do darb al-mathal with a mustahil or something like that. I think that's what it is.
So he's saying the argument's in the Quran. I accept it as the Quran, but the argument, I don't really feel it.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, yes. I think maybe you can take from that, and I'm no expert in Ahmadi, I'll read it again, and maybe someone can correct me from someone who's read Al-Ahmadi quite well, but you can take from that Al-Ahmadi is saying that basically that, polytheism is logically possible. I don't know if that's what he would say. That the reason why he doesn't believe in it, Quran, maybe. I don't know if that's what but there was a clear, there's a clear locking of the horns here. Ibn Taymiyyah refuted him quite heavily for this. And Ahmadi is one of those figures now that there's PhDs being done on him, actually. In the Western world, I think there's a woman, I can't remember her name, but she's doing a PhD, she talks lectures on Ahmadi and those kind of things. But the reason why you always find, and this might sound very over rapid generalizations and stuff, but you always find Western academics flocking to those individuals who say the wildest things. Ibn Hazm and Ahmadi, Ibn Sina, Western academics, they love this kind of, because they're thinking outside the box, they don't want to go status quo. So you'll find them, flocking to these ones and praising them and all that. Ibn Arabi, huge. Ibn Arabi, they love him, Anyway, what was I saying? It's just, but he was traditional. Like Ahmadi he's Ash'ari. Like he stuck with the Ash'ari line. It's not like he just made he thought outside the box quite a lot. What was I saying now? So yeah, it is conceptual at a point where you're talking about the all-powerful agency of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you're thinking about that now. It's conceptual. The only thing you can say is that Ibn Taymiyyah starts with cosmological starting points. But then the question is, on what grounds is it legitimate that you can conceptualize things and make arguments conceptually on something if and only if, they start with cosmological starting points? Does that make sense? So the question would be then, why is it that if you start with cosmological starting points, is subsequent conceptualization legitimate, whereas if you don't, it's not? Do you see the question? And that's something he has not addressed. The fitrah is not, remember for him a fitrah is instinct, it's not knowledge like that. So it's not, you cannot say, well, it's fitrah. It's not a strong argument. So I think this is an issue here, but you don't need to, once again, it's like you're disabling your own army. Like, in a sense, you don't need to make, because I can see if you take a strong nominalist or conceptualist position, how that can bite you back. Like, this would be something an atheist could say. Well, if you're saying universals don't exist, and you're being categorical about that, then why speak about God's attributes in conceptual ways that we can only register conceptually?
What's the link here between universals and conceptualism? I don't understand this.
Conceptualism is different to nominalism in so much as conceptualist doesn't deny the existence of universals, but it just says that they're in the mind. Whereas a nominalist says they don't exist anywhere. They don't exist, full stop. So the reason why we're saying that he's a conceptualist is because he accepts that they exist in the dhihn, he says, in the mind.
So can a conceptualist believe that universals exist outside of the mind?
No.
And that's differentiated from nominalism how again?
Because nominalism says they just make the statement that they don't exist at all. So they don't caveat it with that it's in the mind.
So why would you need universals if you're speaking about God?
Well, no, if we're talking about the attributes of God, like the will of God and so on, what is that? I mean, it's not something you can subject to a microscope. You cannot, so how are we speaking about these things?
Can't we say it's necessary?
Yeah, we can say it's necessary, but necessary, the thing is, for example, Ibn Tamiya would say something to the effect of, is like, okay, he made this distinction between al-maf'ul al-mutlaq, what do you call it, al-wujud al-mutlaq, al-wujud al-mutlaq, the absolute existence. And he says that it's absolute because it's just there. Okay? And Ibn Taymiyyah is saying it's just there in your mind, basically. There is a proximity between what he would say and what Kant would say, or even what an atheist would say. Can you see this proximity? It's there in your mind only. Yeah, it's there in your mind only. No, this idea of the absolute existence is in your mind.
Just the idea.
Yeah, it's in your mind.
And is the absolute existence the necessary existence?
Yes.
So why is it only in your mind if you can prove it logically?
Yeah, he's saying logical things that you're talking about, these categories, they're all in your mind. That's exactly what Kant said. Existence is not a proposition.
Say that again, sorry?
Existence is not a proposition yeah, is that what he said? Existence is not a proposition. Yeah, so he's saying that he's just took it from Ibn Taymiyyah, I believe. I can't prove it now, nor do I have the tools to do it, or time, or inclination. But, I think he's taking it from him. I do believe so.
Is it not proposition? It's not existence.
I think something like that, yeah.
The other way.
Proposition is not
Existence.
it's not an existence. Yeah. Do you see the issue? But then the question is, we go back to the arguments, stock arguments that quite frankly, right, we give to atheists, which is, well, a number is not something that you can empirically arad or jawhar. You cannot put it under a microscope. The logical framework is not something you can put under a microscope. And Ibn Taymiyyah will find this difficult. In fact, that's one of the reasons why verification is dropped, because the scientific method itself could not be substantiated through the verification method. So this seems to be the weakest part of epistemology. I have to be honest and say this. But anyone can say anything. And
So could you ask a question like, how do you prove conceptualism conceptually?
yeah, but the thing is, unless they call it conceptualism, remember, they're not. Ibn Taymiyyah wouldn't call it conceptualism. You could say that if someone said, I adopt the conceptualist position and these are the things. But he's just saying that I don't believe these things exist outside your mind, which are universals. They don't exist outside your mind.
And so for him, the only way you can affirm that, basically, this is about like Allah exists, is because you also have the additional the fitrah, which is.
So for him, the epistemology is arad, jawhar, if you can check it through that, or al-hiss al-batini. This internal experiential process.
But can the hiss al-batini affirm external, like extra mental existences?
Like what?
Allah.
Yeah. Like fitrah, yeah. Fitrah is like that. It's in that. It's lodged there. But then the thing is, there's a leap of faith everywhere. Like, he's eliminating. Think about it, right? We start with cosmological starting points, yeah, and then you have to start speaking conceptually about that which you're not, the unseen, if you like, yeah. You go from the seen to the unseen, and you speak about the unseen as if you're speaking about the seen. But he's eliminated, okay, universals. We're not going to speak about them in argumentative way, but instead of argumentative way, we're going to talk about them in terms of fitrah, okay? But this fitrah thing, which obviously we agree with and we believe in and all that, but if you say it's self-evident, you're still going from seen to unseen. You're still going to that. And what can you say? Well, you've got all these attributes and we sense them in the fitrah. How can, then anyway, it gives a chance for anyone to say anything about anything. I feel this, I feel that.
Does he say also that the fitrah informs us about the truth of the Qur'an?
Hmm?
Does the fitrah also inform us about the truth of the Qur'an?
I don't think I don't think he said this.
Because then you could say, okay, like, so someone hears the Qur'an and then they feel, okay, this must be true. Okay, what's here?
Yeah, I think in that sense he does believe in that. He does believe in that. Yeah, the Qur'an's a dhikr. It reminds you of your original state. I mean, where is the ayah which says that وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّةً وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شَهِدْنَا. That when we took from the progeny of Adam from his backs the progenies or the souls, and we said to them, am I not your Lord? And he said, yes, I am. And we said, yes, you are our Lord. And تَقُولُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ إِنَّا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ. That you would say on the day of judgment that we were oblivious of this, heedless of this matter. So basically, and this is, it's a strong argument. He's saying that this is self-evident. Believing in God is self-evident. You don't actually need a single argument for his existence. It's all self-evident. Allah, He installed it into you. You don't need a single argument here. But he's not saying, therefore, I'm not going to make an argument. He makes an argument, which is the infinite regress argument, which you've all heard before. It's the same argument, the infinite regress argument. If I were to drink this thing, and then before I drank it, someone else and someone, it's the infinite regress argument. But he's saying it's infinite. What's impossible is the infinite regress of causes, not of things. Do you remember this? Yeah. Okay. Now we move on to the final part of the session and the hardest part of the session. if you didn't think this was hard enough, but this is, we've gone level up now, so we need to be aware of these discourses and these things here. And so let's start by saying this is the hardest part of the session because actually we're in the spirit of putting things together, okay? Like the past and the present and all these kind of things. I would say the central objection of both the cosmological argument and forms of contingency argument, and even sometimes the ontological argument, almost all arguments for God's existence, is Bertrand Russell's objection. And who can remember Bertrand Russell's objection to the cosmological argument? And what is his famous objection?
The universe just is.
He said that as well. That's true. That's correct. That's one of his famous. That's the right answer. But let me give you a bit more of a hint in terms of when he was having a debate with Copleston on the internet, on the radio, and there was a pivotal turning point in the debate. It's a very famous debate, and I don't know when it was. I'll tell you what year it was. The debate. It was in 19. What was it? I don't know when it was, but I'll find out the year. But it was a famous debate, and this was a pivotal turning point because Copleston was doing very well in that debate, and I think he won that debate actually. But there was one thing that made everyone think, Which is when he said what? Was?
He made the case for the compositional fallacy, which is that just because a part has a certain attribute doesn't mean the whole has to have that same attribute.
And do you remember the exact example that he gave?
Russell gave.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, Abdurrahman?
Well, it's something like if we say that every man has a mother, it doesn't mean that the human race has.
Beautiful. That's exactly what he said. He said he says this as if you're saying to me, Yani, just because every human being has a mother, therefore the human being has a mother, which is what? The compositional fallacy, famous, the strongest possible objection to the God's argument, godly arguments, whatever, which people is now in textbooks and all this kind of things. And we've been through this before, but let me just remind you of it. And it's problematic. Why? Because if I say, look, you've got a wall here, which is made up of small little bricks, yes. We've said this before, and I use this example because it's pretty straightforward, yeah? You've got a wall that is made up of small bricks, yeah? Okay. But it becomes a big wall. So the part-whole distinction, what is it? Is it same or different? Okay. So it's different. But what if I say, look, each brick is white, and the wall is white? Is it different or the same here? It's the same. So the question is, when is it different and when is it the same? Do you see? Because if you say, well, everything in the universe has a cause, therefore the universe has a cause. There's two ways we can understand this. Or everything in the universe is dependent, therefore the universe is dependent. Do you see? There's two ways you can understand this. It can either be that the part-whole distinction is differentiated, or it can be what? The same. So how do we know when is what or when is what? That's the question. How do we know that when we're making an argument that we are not committing the fallacy of composition? When is it a fallacy of composition? What are the principles that must be at play for it to be a fallacy of composition, or when is it not the fallacy of composition? So, I mean, nowadays people have tried to revisit this, and one of the people that I read who have revisited this is Joshua Rasmussen, who I've actually had a conversation with, and I put it up online. I should have spoken to him about this, but I came across this after in his other book, because I didn't read that book that he wrote. I read the other book that he wrote. Then I read this book, and it was interesting. I'm not saying it's completely wrong or anything like that, but I'm saying it's not the best. And I'll explain what he says and what his principles are, and then we'll talk about Ibn Taymiyyah's contribution to this. Yeah. So Rasmussen, I'm maybe pronouncing his name all wrong, but he has two principles. Okay, one of them is called the principle of inheritance, and the other one he calls the principle of diffusion. Okay, and he says that. I'll read it. He says a diffusive property is one which spans arbitrary subsections. Yeah, like a marble block, like a marble block, which it is true that even if broken up into pieces, each piece will be a marble. So if you have a marble block, I don't have anything like that here. If I have a marble block, paper's fine. Yeah, paper should be the same, right? And if you rip it up, yeah, every single piece will be white. If white piece of paper, I rip it up, every single piece is going to be what? White. It's diffusive. It's a diffusive property, which means it spans arbitrary subsections and it's inherited throughout the whole paper. He says, so like the marble rock, if broken up into pieces, each piece will be marble. Diffusive properties become whole inherited by the thing in question. Yeah. Given the example of a marble floor, Rasmussen states that in the case of the marble floor, the floor inherits some of its properties from its parts. So you inherit it from your parts. So, because if you put marble floor, put tile, you have now a marble floor. You had marble tiles, and now it's a marble floor. So the part and the part contributes to the whole. Yes. From white tiles, you get a white floor. Okay. Same thing with white. Put white tiles together, you have a white floor. So he's saying here the distinction between part to whole is same. Yes. The other properties, like for example, if every part of the marble floor has mass, so too does the floor. Similarly, if the parts are shiny glass, so too is the whole. The qualities Rasmussen considers diffusers are, now these are the ones he says. If they're colors, textures, densities, and being homogeneous. 4 things he mentions, yeah? So colors, textures, densities, and being homogeneous. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So he mentions, obviously he doesn't reference it in a book. He actually says that Graham Oppy, who's seen as the leading atheist interrogator now, or a philosophical interrogator of the God arguments and stuff. He said he wrote him an email. Apparently, he put this in his footnote in his book. But he said that Graham Oppy wrote him an email, okay? And that Graham Oppy, by the way, who Andalusi just recently debated. Do you remember that debate on liberalism and whatever, yeah? He said that Graham Oppy attempted to refute the theory by giving an example of reflective light. So look, reflective light is, in a sense, you cannot say is part whole inherited. And I thought, well, there's a lower laying fruit, which is quantum physics, yani. Okay, if I get, for example, yani, this piece of paper, if I go into the subatomic particles, you cannot say it's white. Do you see the point? Like, there's a lower laying fruit, which I thought, yani. So if we go with his 1, 2, 3, 4 classifications, there's issues still with the classification. Do you see the issue here? So I wasn't fully convinced. Now, obviously, you can say the quantum world to use, you need a theory of everything before, and you can defend this. I'm not saying this is unsalvageable. I'm not saying that Rasmussen's thing is unsalvageable. I'm just saying that it's not the best. So what I want to do is read to you what Ibn Taymiyyah writes on the issue, because surprisingly, before I say what Ibn Taymiyyah says, Rasmussen writes in his book, he says that I'm going to tell you something which I've not read in any book or read in any article. Like he says, it's not like him to speak like that, if you know him and his temperament. And so he said, I'm going to tell you something. When he talks about this whole inheritance and the diffusive properties versus the inheritance, and I'm going to tell you something which I've not read in any book or in any, I've seen in any article. And he gives us these 2 principles and these 4 things. And we've seen some of the issues with them. Because when is it part whole, or when is it when is it the same, when is it differentiated? That's the question still. We don't have any principles here. But Ibn Taymiyyah comes to maybe the rescue. Let's take a look at what he says. I'm going to read out the whole thing, yeah? And this might be a mouthful, but let's just do it anyway. It says, the principle in this regard is that if adding one member of a set to another member yields a change in the judgment of the set via the second member, then the judgment on the set will not be comparable to that of the individual members. If the judgment on the set does not change with the addition of the second member, then the judgment on the set will be like that of the individual unit. An example of the first category could be found in cases where the addition of one part to another segment of the set causes the entire set to become more, longer, or more intense. Okay? Just remember those 3 things, yeah? More, longer, more intense. Or instead of the word maybe extended, yeah? So extended. Because extension can be from any direction. Yeah, it doesn't have to be longer. It could be, let's just use the word extended for now, yeah? In that case, the judgment on the set cannot be like that on the individual units. Consequently, if it's said, this is a long day, this does not mean that each part of the day is long, okay? This is in contrast to saying that every part of the totality of parts exists or does not exist, or is contingent, necessary, or impossible. That is because adding an existing thing to an existing thing would not prevent an existing thing from becoming existent. Moreover, adding a non-existent thing to a non-existent thing would not prevent that thing from being non-existent. Adding a contingent thing to an impossible thing does not preclude such entities from being contingent or impossible. This is in contrast to something which is inherently impossible, which if added to something contingent can become contingent as well. Examples in this regard include knowledge and life, and with the former being impossible unless it is coupled with the latter. Or it may be one of 2 opposing things, which is contingent in and of itself, but impossible when fused together with the other concept. And this we can discern the difference between the continuation of effect, which are generatable or destructible, and the connection with the existence of causes and effects, which are contingent and infinitely regressive. Thus, if a particular originated thing is added to another particular originated thing, this increases the level of continuity, protraction, and extension, which are not established for the individual members of the set. Thus, if the set is long, protracted, and continuous, such that it is characterized by muchness and intensity, this does not necessarily mean that each of the individual members will be tall, long, and continuous, such that it would be described as much and intense, having causes and their effects in such a series, in a series such that each of them is contingent and fused together does not prevent such members from being contingent. This is similar of how having things which are non-existent and then the coupling them together with other things that are non-existent will not transfer them to non-existent thing into the realm of existence. Hence, the adding together of non-existent things which are also possible will render them existent. This is in Minhaj al-Sunnah, pages 428 to 432. Let me explain what's going on here, yeah? So, what's happening is this. He's saying, look, the way you've got to look at it, first and foremost, is that if you add something to something, and this means, if you add a part to a whole, yeah? And that increases either, number one, the intensity, the what was the other thing I said? Extension, or cause extension, and the other one was muchness, yeah, or at least numericalness or whatever. Then that thing is part whole differentiated. Does that make sense? Okay, let me say this again. Okay, if I add some part of a thing to a series of parts, and then as a result of me adding those two things together, I get more intensity of such thing, or I get an extension of such thing, or I get more of that thing. It's more now. Then that thing is part to whole differentiated. So for example, if I add bricks which are small in size to other bricks which are small in size, in fact, the whole is going to be different to the part. However, so the only thing that is unsusceptible to part-whole differentiation are things which are unsusceptible to addition and subtraction. For example, if I add nothing to nothing, let's make this very simple, what do I have? Nothing. Because nothing is something which is unsusceptible to, if you add nothing with nothing, if you add, it's unsusceptible to additional subtraction. So if you add nothingness to nothingness, it does not create muchness or extension of that thing or intensity. If you add nothing to nothing, you have nothing. You have nothing actually. You see the going on. Okay, if I add, he gives principles. He says it's possible that you can change categories here. Once again, he's speaking conceptually, yeah? He said, like, for example, if you have two contingent things, you can bring two contingent things together and create an impossible thing. For example, a tall man is contingent. A short man is contingent, but when you put them together, it's impossible. You cannot have a tall, short man. But the overriding principle, you might have heard of this many times before, is فاقد الشيء لا يعطي. Something bereft of a quality cannot produce it. If you're bereft of something, that's what my mum used to say to me, whenever I used to say something, like, trying to make a contribution. Or if someone, like, in our Arab countries, which is a very famous saying, yani, if someone says, like, I'm going to teach you how to be a man. So you say, فاقد الشيء لا يعطي. Something that is bereft of something, Is Ali Dawa on the phone? Ali, can you hear me, brother? No, okay. Something that is bereft of a quality cannot produce the quality. So nothingness is bereft of somethingness. Therefore, if you add nothingness to nothingness, then what happens? Then you have nothingness. So he's saying the same thing now. He's saying that, look, the only situation where you're going to have part-whole differentiation is if, by doing so, or by adding part to whole, you have some addition somewhere. You have some addition somewhere. Now he's saying, let's go back to now the contingency point. If you add contingent things to contingent things, he's saying this. Ibn Taymiyyah is making the contingency argument here. He literally is saying, if you put originated and contingent things together, something like, let me give you an example. He's not giving this example. This is my example, obviously. This is a phone, a mobile phone. As you can see, I've sealed it up just in case someone tries to snatch it, this and that falls from the pocket, something happens. You have to protect the phone. This phone requires charge. I'm sure your one does as well, right? You see, unless you have some kind of solar, but even then, this is a solar phone, it's charged from the sun, yeah? I'm going to tell you what charge is on now. It's on, how do I find out? I don't know what it's on. Let's pretend it's 25%, yeah? Now, if I have a phone like this, it's dependent on charge. You understand this point? It's very easy. Yeah? No one can deny the point. Okay, no problem. If I get two phones like this, I get two just like this. Can you show me your phone? Sorry to say. I just want to make it visual because this is too much. This talking and this, let's just make it easy. Yes. There's a clear size differential. but this is like a kid's phone. So what is this? Huh? Anyway, this is 25% charge. Your one is 53. Okay. Now, do these two phones need more charge or less charge collectively? They need more charge collectively. Yani if I want to power these two phones, it's more, I'd need more charge than just powering this one here. Now, okay, if I'm putting a third phone to the equation, third one, would we need more charge or less charge? We need more charge. So what are we increasing here? Dependency. That's the one. You've woken up. You've completely woken up. Yes. So the more you put dependent things, Ibn Taymiyyah is saying this, the more you're putting dependent things together, the more you're actually increasing their dependency. It's like if you add nothing to nothing to nothing, it's like you have more nothing, yani, conceptually, although nothing is really going on, because nothing doesn't exist. But you're increasing the dependence. You have one dependent thing, two dependent things, three dependent thing, 4, 5, 6. Increasing. It needs more charge now. If that wasn't the case, no, we wouldn't have power plants. We'd say, you know what, forget about this whole thing about, electricity and oil and all this, that. Because we believe there's a point, there's a turning point when you put dependent things together where there's no requirement for energy or charge or dependent. It doesn't need anything. I don't think any nuclear physicist has said that. And there's a reason for this. Because they understand that when you put more and more things that read energy together, you need more charge. So Ibn Taymiyyah is saying in terms of part-whole differentiation, there is nothing in dependency as a quality to indicate to us that if you add more and more of it together, that you somehow get necessity. Because the truth is, when you put more dependent things together, the intensity of dependency is increased. It's an extension of the dependency. So dependency is part whole. No, it's part whole. Similar. It's part whole. Just he's saying, look, where's the burden of proof? If I was an atheist and said, if you put nothing with nothing together, then you have something. Like there was maybe nothing and then something happened. And there was absolutely nothing and then something. This is one of the most powerful questions that you can ask an atheist. Why is there something more, rather than nothing? Why? If you don't like the why question, what is the reason that there is something rather than nothing? Because some of them say, we don't, like Peter Atkins, he said, I don't believe in why questions. Say, okay, fine, I'll change it for you. What is the reason that there's something rather than nothing? Oh, I don't know, I'm agnostic, I'm this and that. Can nothing transform into something? I cannot. Even if you add it, but nothing, you cannot get something. Because something bereft of a quality cannot produce it. Unless, it can only not produce it, unless if you added a part of it to another part, that it would be increased in intensity, extension, or muchness. That's the only exception to the... So the rule is something bereft of a quality cannot produce it. The exception is, unless if you add a part to it, to another part, and it produces more intensity, extension, or muchness. That's our postulation. You have to show us, you have to demonstrate, and Ibn Taymiyyah would say, as an empiricist, not really an empiricist, but someone who likes the cosmological method. So you have to demonstrate it scientifically. Show it to me that if you can add something which is contingent, or something which needs something, dependent, with something which is dependent, and you keep adding it, that somehow the dependency is eliminated or is absolved. It's not going to happen. And so he solves this issue. You see, he's saying something, the main principle is this: something bereft of a quality cannot produce it. The exception is unless by adding a part to another part of it, it produces an increase in intensity, extension, or muchness. So going back to Bertrand Russell's thing, he'll say, Bertrand, what are you talking about, my friend? Yeah? He won't say my friend. He may say, actually, when you say the human race has a mother, what do you mean by that? Because how can the human race have a mother? Unless you're talking about some kind of Neoplatonic universal category, which we both believe, you as an atheist and me as Ibn Taymiyyah, that these categories don't even exist in the first place. So that's an unintelligible proposition. But then he'll go further and say, look, if you're saying that the human race has a mother, meaning that there was one mother that started, there was one woman that started the human race, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not logically inconsistent at all. Why is that illogically inconsistent? That was a first human being, no issue. But if you mean by that there's the part-whole differentiation, and that is unsubstantiated because of the compositional fallacy, then he would say, the argument I put forward to you, Bertrand Russell, is that something bereft of a quality cannot produce it unless, if you add a part to another part of it, it will increase in intensity, muchness, or extension. And in the case of dependency, we have no evidence of any of those things at all. So it's upon you, atheist, to produce the evidence. So he switched the what? The burden of proof. Just like an atheist saying what? An atheist saying something can come from nothing. It goes back to the ayah, the Qur'an. And everything does. To be honest with you, it does. And this shows you the superiority of the Quranic discourse. Am khuliqu min ghayri shay'. Have they been created from nothing? Or were they themselves the creators of themselves? The whole argument, the depths of this argument goes back to the ayah, which is that you cannot have something from nothing, A, and something cannot produce itself. A dependent thing cannot bring itself into existence. So, how do you now? And I think this is his defining contribution, and it's better than what Rasmussen says, because Rasmussen, in many ways, he's saying that the difference between what Rasmussen is saying is that these four things, colors, textures, and whatever, can't remember the other ones, homogeneity and one other thing which I forget now, being homogeneous, diffuse, density is the four things. He's saying four things. In many ways, you can see there's a flesh that joins the two ideas, which is what? Something that grows, right? Or something which can spread. But the opposite here is that he's saying anything with those four things is diffusive. We're not saying everything with those four things is diffusive. We're going negative. We're starting by saying something bereft of a quality cannot produce it unless, if you add a part to it, to another part, it produces a different whole. A different whole. And so he effectively, in a sense, I personally believe, until proven otherwise, that he solves the biggest quandary of the arguments for God's existence. One of the biggest ones. And I have not seen this kind of level of assessment to be fair, I have not seen it anywhere. I think this is his defining contribution to the whole thing. And it's put in Minhaj al-Sunnah or something, which is talking about the Shia. It's a bit of an unusual place to put it, to be honest with you. Well, that's why you have to, in order to know Ibn Taymiyyah's positions, you have to have a wide reading of Ibn Taymiyyah. And today we've seen the great mind of Ibn Taymiyyah in action. We've critiqued some of his theories, and we've also taken some of what he's said on board. And I think we can easily take what he said into arguments with atheistic detractors who don't believe in God's existence, and especially on the main objections of God's existence relating to, but not limited to, the compositional fallacy. And with that, I conclude. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.